of these applications. And one, see, is this a legitimate use of log data? We might find we were looking for vulnerability A, but we really find that it was looking at vulnerability B that we didn't yet know about. But we can also tell if it's targeting our specific app in general. And so that's one example of how you can use this data. And I'm personally very excited about being able to actually ask the entire set, or at least a large set of the applications in the world about vulnerabilities, and using that during security response.
And this is just the beginning, right? There's 300,000 apps now. What is there going to be? 1 million in the next 6 months? Who knows? And we're going to be publishing more and more on this data set. It's only going to get more interesting.
So we're going to try to predict the future a little bit. What's to come? We have some interesting data about mobile apps right now on different platforms. Where do we think this is all going? So I think the first thing is App Store distribution changes a lot. I think when you're trying to figure out where mobile apps, like where bad stuff is going to happen, you have to look at what app stores will allow and what they won't.
Yeah. And clearly we're going to see obviously less of the traditional viruses that we did on the desktop, but we're going to see more of the gray area, right?
Yeah. How many hours do you think it'll take to remove "this is a virus" app from any app store? I mean, it's going to be removed nearly instantly.
If it even makes it.
If it even makes it, yes. So the question is, there's a lot of really sensitive stuff on your phone. So, effectively there are gold bars in there, and people want to get access to said gold bars. Do you think that people are going to say, oh, I couldn't do what I did before, therefore I'm not going to try? That seems a little silly to me. But the question is, what are we seeing right now that leads us to believe that different sorts of things are happening? For example, apps that seem good but actually have hidden functionality. This flashlight app, I guarantee you, was a wake-up call to everyone, A, who wanted to tether, but B, who's trying to sneak things into the App Store, whether it's just because you want to get access to protected APIs to get someone's phone number, or you want to do something far worse. There was an interesting example of a game on iPhone not too long ago called Aurora Faint. Some of you guys remember it. What it did was it implemented multiplayer by uploading your contact list to a server.
And this is a legitimate developer.
Totally legitimate game. Doesn't look so good from a black box perspective. But things like that, how do you know if that application is good or bad? Is that an application that is actually just snarfing down your contact list and going to sell it to spammers? Or is that like some guys who really didn't know how to do multiplayer very well? Yeah, it turned out to be the latter, but...
So differentiating between honest mistake, legitimate developer building great games, between someone maliciously trying to spy on you, for example.
And arguably, you may not be able to differentiate between the two. You can say, hey, certain type of behavior is prohibited, but that's a very, very slippery slope, and it can get very, very fuzzy very quickly. And so if an application is good, but either has functionality or has hidden functionality, or hey, let's imagine, let's get this wallpaper app, let's get it on 1 to 4 million phones, and let's push an update into the store. Guess what? We just pushed malware onto 1 to 4 million phones. Yep. And it's a very interesting spreading technique of an application that seems good but turns bad. There are some counter incentives to that. For example, if you have an app that has 1 million users, you may not want to turn it bad. You may just want to make money legitimately. But we'll see.
I also think we'll start to see OS vendors start to try and get on top of the idea of re-requesting permissions with updates, for example, which just seems pretty logical.
Yeah. Android in 2.2, for example, does a great thing. They auto-update applications unless the application changes its permissions. So this actually serves to highlight changes in permissions and target people's attention. So you're not going to distract users by looking at permission dialogues if they've already accepted and looking at that dialogue. Only if things changed on an app are you going to look at it. So I think that's actually a great thing. It might mean people will actually look at these sorts of screens. And similar to the spy apps, parenting concerns aside, many would argue that it's legitimate to have an app to see where your kids are. That's how they market themselves, right? But many would also argue that that same app is illegal and immoral and all sorts of things when it's used to spy on a competitor, for example. And do you remove that from the App Store? You might be able to say, hey, it's against our provisions, but you're also removing a pretty legitimate set of functionality from parents, for example. And I think there is this kind of gray area, like with novice versus malicious purposes, that it's going to be very interesting to see how we draw that line on the different platforms in the future. So key takeaways. Users, pay attention to what you download. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. Developers, be responsible with the data that you collect and how you use it. And if we see anybody putting sensitive data into the logs and they were at Blackhat, shame, shame, shame. Administrators, you don't want to ban apps on smartphones or smartphones. I mean, they're a great tool. They make people more productive. There's a vuln in Word. You don't put everyone on typewriters for a week until it's patched. We just need to think intelligently about it and figure out how to make these things secure and make the right decisions. Yeah. And our goal is to help give data to help people understand where the threats are and how we can solve them.
And I think it's important just to clarify, just because apps have access to certain parts of data doesn't mean they're bad. We need to look at the context. We need to be aware of them. And I think that as individuals, we need to make sure we're protecting ourselves. But more importantly, I see challenges. I think we get calls from CSOs almost every couple days now asking about, okay, we have consumer devices coming in to our corporate resources. When individuals are making decisions for themselves that then impact our enterprise, how do we think about that? I don't know if we have the answer to that problem yet, but this type of data set, the way we're approaching this, is absolutely the direction that it's going to need to take to actually solve this problem.
So if anyone has their pet questions, private questions that they want to ask mobile applications, we have a big data set and we're happy to ask them. So if you have some ideas on what apps might be doing bad, or if you're curious about behavior of certain apps, send me an email and we'll try to run them. Yeah. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah,
it's great.